Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share scary Wendigo horror stories. First story. A guy and his dog just saved me from a goddamn witch and her Wendigo. Where do I even start? Benny. Benny's dead. And Goat. Shit, they're all dead. Except me. All because I had to piss. What, man? We were out camping near Breck. Thought we'd get one in before the snow settles over Colorado tomorrow. It was Goat's idea. He wanted to celebrate something. I can't even remember what it was at this point. And we all agreed that it would be fun, something to tell stories about later. I hate that we were halfway right. We hiked up with a bunch of gear and food and beer, and everything was great for the first few hours. But as soon as the sun went down and the darkness enveloped the mountains, things started to get. First, we thought that we were just too wasted hearing things, and we all silently agreed to ignore it, pretending that everything was fine. But it finally got to the point where we just couldn't pretend anymore and decided that it would be better if we just left then and there. So, we began packing up. But I had to piss, and I said so before walking off into the darkness behind the trees, pretending not to hear the noises echoing up around the peaks. A mixture of laughter and screaming and a weird, piercingly high howling sound, like the wind knifing through the needles of the pines. That piss saved my life. I had just shaken off when I heard him, sounded like Petey, saying, "Who are you?" And then a more insistent voice, maybe Jones or Goat. "Lady, are you deaf?" Then a concerned voice, Tim's. "I think she may be hurt. Hey, are you okay?" Silence for a moment, and then someone shouted, and I couldn't identify the next voice I heard. "Hello, goodbye. Hello, goodbye. Goodbye." Confused, I peeked around the trunk of the tree half expecting to see something. And I did. There was an old woman standing near the edge of the firelight. She was wearing a yellowish rag. Her hair hung lank and limp around her pallor face. Her face. It was disturbing. She was grinning from literally ear to ear, and her eyes were fully, deeply black. She looked like a witch, an actual demonic being of the night. She laughed and then said, "Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye." Tim, Jones, and Petey were the first to go. They just burn up in flames 7 feet high. Their screams were ungodly. I've never heard anything like them before. Hope to never again. And the smell, nauseating. I saw their skin bubble and slew off their bones in huge swaths of sinew and meat. The fire was so hot that all their blood just evaporated away with a sinister hiss. When the flames finally died down, 3 unrecognizably burnt bodies fell, shattering into ashes that blew away on the wind. Benny and Goat turned to run, and they almost made it too. But she pointed to them, and suddenly they stopped, freezing in place, their mouths open too wide, their tongues lolling out. Somehow, someway she had stunned them, just by pointing. She cackled. It was gross, and looked over her shoulder. Out of the slits between the trees, a hulking mass walked forward. It looked like the love child of Andre the Giant and a hellish elk. For a moment nothing happened, and then chaos. The antlerman ran forward, towards Benny and Goat, snorting, screaming. He got to Benny first, impaling him on one prong and lifting him high into the air. Benny slid down slow. His mouth was open, but there was no sound, only a red-tinted thread of drool. Antlerman swung his head to the left, and Benny flew off, hitting a nearby tree with a hard crunch. But he wasn't dead yet, and I saw him crawl forward, a stream of his guts trailing out behind him, steaming in the night air. Antlerman took 3 steps forward and stopped right next to Benny's head, lifted a hooved foot, and smashed it down and down and down, crushing his skull, stirring the brain matter up. And when Antlerman finally turned around, all that was left of Benny's face was a bloody pulp and one eye, perfect, unharmed, blue iris staring blankly up at the stars. Go was next. He couldn't move, and I could see his eyes rolling around and around, wild with fear, trying to see if there was a way out. And then they stopped, right on me, and I knew that he saw me hiding, watching. I moved back a bit behind the tree, peeking out, cringing as Antlerman took hold of Goat's arms, pulling and not stopping. I heard one resounding pop, then another, Goat's arms dislocating. But Antlerman kept pulling and pulling, and I couldn't tear my eyes away. I saw Goat's arms ripped right off his body. Right clean off, but he couldn't move. He just stood there like some sick phallus, blood pulsing from both holes. Antlerman cocked his left arm back and sucker punched Goat right in the face, breaking his nose, sending him reeling backwards, and before he even hit the ground, I could see that he was dead. Job done. Antlerman turned back towards the witch, and she shook her head, saying words that nearly made me shit my pants. There's one more hiding over there watching. I think he's enjoying himself. Oh, what the hell, I shat myself. Why lie? I froze for a moment, unable to fight or flee. And then there was this noise, mechanical, recognizable, and a guy wearing a goddamn ridiculous as shit gas mask burst through the trees on a Ducati, headlights blaring, engine roaring. He came out of literally nowhere. I blinked, ready to jump up, ready to run. But before I could, something soared over me. Something big, four-legged, a dog. A huge goddamn dog. There was a booming noise, and I realized that Gas Mask was firing a shotgun while the dog beside him barked. The blasts from the shots were amazingly bright and lit up the entire area with a severe fluorescent-like glow. Suddenly, the dog shot off, running low to the ground, straight towards Antlerman, leaping up, latching onto his arm. Gas Mask reloaded, then swung the shotgun swiftly towards the witch and fired again, hitting her in the chest 4 times, making her stagger back, screeching. Next to her, the dog was ripping and tearing at Antlerman, pushing him back towards the trees. Off the bike now, Gas Mask slung the shotgun over his back and grabbed a pistol from his belt, firing the whole clip, shouting, "Hocus pocus that you bitch," and the witch fled. Antlerman immediately followed. The dog charged off after them, baying loudly. I heard a loud, horrific bugle, like an elk dying, and something large crashed to the ground. Gas Mask whistled, high-low in between, and after a few seconds, the dog burst through the brush, panting, covered in blood and guts. It looked like it was grinning. It trotted up to the man, and he leaned forward, patting it on the head once, twice, and I heard him mutter, "Good girl." I said, and Gas Mask looked up at me, like he forgot I was there. "Oh," he said, "yeah, shit, you better run." Behind me, I heard the witch's laughter boil up again, weaker, wavering. The dog growled, crouching low, hackles high. The man pulled some shells from his pocket, reloaded and cocked his shotgun, then repeated, "Run. We'll take care of this." And I did. I ran, and I ran. Made it back to the car. Heard the shotgun firing behind me, and screaming and howling. No laughter, though. Currently on my way to report this. I hope to hell they'll believe me. But I don't even know if I believe what happened. That guy, that dog, that motherfucking witch bitch, and the deer dude. What just happened? Second story. How to survive camping. A bridle of flesh. I went to the family graveyard just after dawn. It felt like the right thing to do. I sat in front of my parents' gravestone and stared at the matching dates of when they died. I've faced my own death before. I hear it every night, skulking outside the window, circling the house in search of the little girl from which it takes its appeasement. Yet that is a vague future, and I fear it in much the same way that you may fear a cancer diagnosis or a car crash. It is one of many possible ends. It can be held at bay in the mind as a remote possibility. What I contemplated that morning was a death so close at hand I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. There was a deadline. It is one thing to expect to die. It is another to be able to count the minutes. I think I sought some kind of peace. The presence of my parents, perhaps. But my vigil only served to remind me that they are dead and gone, and I was facing this alone. It was almost a relief when the sun rose, for I could at least get moving and feel like I was doing something to save myself and my niece. There was a bundle on the porch when I returned to my house. At first I thought it was a dead snake, Then I thought it was rope. As I drew closer, I saw the buckles and realized it was a crafted item, the leather thongs cut as thin as embroidery floss. Tentatively, I picked it up and let it unfold, trying to decipher the fastenings and in what arrangement they were supposed to lay. The leather was soft and supple, and I thought it would break when I tested one of the cords for strength. It held, however, and the more I tried, the more I realized that it was not going to break, not for me or any creature, human or otherwise. I've seen such craftsmanship before. A gift from the harvesters. It was a bridle cut from the strip of skin they took from my brother. I was revolted just holding it. How could I not be? The feel of my brother's skin, so soon after watching him suffer as it was peeled from his arm. Under ordinary circumstances, I think I would have hurled it into the bottom of a desk drawer and tried to forget about its existence. But desperation allows us to do things that were once detestable. It is a powerful force. I took the bridle with me. The old sheriff had offered his help with this problem, but I'd turned him down. This wasn't something we could fix with guns. What kind of gun do you use to take down something the size of an elephant, anyway? No, this was a problem that had to be solved within human means. My normal allies didn't have the ability. Bo at least seemed to approve of the plan. When I told him, though I couldn't tell if it was because it would work or if he was pleased that the dapple gray stallion wouldn't see it coming. That's right. For all you smartass in the comments last post, it's Kate coming out of the corner with a steel chair. Also, not sure what that NFC stuff was about, but if it has anything to do with old land, could the owner I dunno message me or something? We should chat. I went to my neighbor's property, the one with the lake. I stood at the edge and took a deep breath. It was quite a bit early, but I didn't have any better ideas. This had to work. I had to make it work. So I mustered all that anger and frustration, and I piled it into my chest, and then with all the strength I had, I yelled down at the water. "Hey, assholes!" I cried. "Do you want to help me save Christmas?" For a few minutes, nothing happened. I stood there with my heart hammering, feeling mildly self-conscious, and waited. If they didn't show, I told myself I would swim down to the bottom of that lake and drag them up. Then, just as I was getting ready to yell again, a single ripple appeared in the center of the lake. It spread outwards until it reached the bank and vanished. As soon as the water had returned to a mirror surface, the stillness shattered again. The surface churned, fairly boiling with activity, and then a horse's head surged out of the water. It ducked its head, forelegs straining to drag it upwards, and then the rider broke through the surface. He sat proudly on the horse's back, unstirred by its struggles, back straight with one hand on the reins, the other on the hilt of his sword. The pointed tip on his helmet glinted in the bright sunlight. Around him, the water continued to churn as more horses and their riders appeared, climbing their way out of the water and stamping to a stop in a row in front of me. My summoning ritual had worked. The shuriken had come. The lead rider leaned down out of the saddle, putting his face close to mine. He smelled strongly of peppermint. "We don't care to be insulted," he said sternly. "I knew it'd get your attention. You play a dangerous game here, camp manager." He swung himself back in the saddle, leaving behind a faint scent of evergreen. "I'm all out to give. I need your help." And I explained the situation. They, of course, wanted to know what this had to do with saving Christmas. Wasn't it obvious? I snapped at them. They cared that everyone was in the Christmas spirit, and if just one person wasn't, well then down to a cold and watery grave they went. So wouldn't they care if there was one family out there that would spend their Christmas in mourning, because their firstborn child had been stolen from them and wouldn't be there to celebrate their first Christmas? How can anyone possibly enjoy Christmas with such a heavy burden on their shoulders? They considered. The riders shifted in their saddles, glancing at one another, and they conferred in low voices, and I am actually not sure if it was Russian or not. Finally, they all turned to stare down at me again, and my heart raced, knowing that this was the moment of judgment. A child's first Christmas should be joyous, the shuriken intoned. "We will help." I wasn't going to argue, but I still think the whole first Christmas thing is a bit silly when the child isn't going to remember any of it. The lead rider edged his horse forwards and reached a hand down towards me. I stared at it suspiciously. I was hoping to borrow a horse? I suggested tentatively. In the stories, it takes a horse to defeat a horse. Do you know how to ride? Does it matter? Aren't they magical horses? His eyes narrowed. Get on, he said tersely. I took his hand, and he swung me up into the saddle. It was graceful only because the shuriken heaved me high enough to grab my waist, and then spun me about before I hit the saddle like I was a ballerina or something. I'm honestly shocked I didn't kick the horse in the head. I barely had time to situate myself properly. My legs were almost overlapping with his, as the saddle afforded very little room for me. His body was cold against my back, and the smell of mint was overwhelming. Then he kicked his horse in motion, and I was bounced up and almost fell off sideways. But his arms on the reins went around my body and kept me in place. The shuriken yelled orders at his companions as we went. The horses covered yards at a time, each step sending the scenery lurching past at a dizzying rate. We were at the edge of the property, then across the road, then racing down the street that ran parallel to the campground. The horses jumped a car at one point, and I twisted in the saddle to see if the driver had even noticed us, but we were too far away, and the car had vanished, and we were cutting into a field that sat between the campground and the town. What's your plan? The shuriken asked. I have a bridle, I said. We'll get you close, and I'll throw you onto its back. I won't last a second. The shuriken only laughed, a deep, humorless laugh in the back of his throat. Predatory. I remained silent, afraid to ask what they planned to do, keenly aware that we only know the sanitized version of Christmas time. The stories of old have teeth, and I had invoked creatures from the early time when the world was raw and dangerous and death walked hand in hand with humanity. The dapple-gray stallion came to meet us. We were at the edge of the field, riding parallel to the woods. The stallion burst through the trees, smashing the young saplings aside as it emerged. The shuriken split in two, each group veering sharply away from the stallion, branching out to race diagonally away from it. The monstrous horse pursued. I could not see it around the shuriken's body, and I did not dare lean out to look, as the horse was in a full gallop now, and I felt like I was going to bounce wildly off its back if I eased my death grip on the saddle for a moment. Hold these, the shuriken said, shoving the reins into my hands. The hell do I do with them? I yelled, aghast. Don't drop them. That's all. Clearly the horse knew what it needed to do. I swore under my breath and hunkered low over the saddle, wrapping the reins around my hands so I could keep clutching the saddle for some vestige of stability. The shuriken twisted behind me, and I risked a half glance backwards to see what the hell he was doing. He was drawing back a horse bow. I really wish I knew more about these things' origins. He fired. The other riders were doing the same. I could see the dapple-gray stallion's head now, its lips peeled back to reveal its canines, breath coming out in steamy clouds, and its eyes were wide and fixed on the horses it pursued, wild with hunger. It was gaining. The arrow stuck into its neck. The dapple-gray stallion didn't seem to notice, even as more arrows struck its neck and sides. A little blood leaked out, but that was all. Behind me, the shuriken dropped its bow back over the quiver and wrapped something around his wrists. I saw it glint in the sunlight, a thread, shimmering like silver, connecting him to the arrow. A tether. The horse carrying us slowed down. The dapple-gray stallion veered sharply in our direction, hooves churning, stretching its head, and opening its mouth for the fatal bite at the other horse's throat. Opposite us, the shuriken jerked hard on their own tethers, their horses straining to pull the stallion back and away from us, forcing it to keep going straight ahead. So this was how they were going to keep it from throwing me off. It was surrounded now, and so long as the tethers held, it would not be able to move wildly in any one direction. There is your child, the shuriken shouted at me. Be mindful. We will be most displeased if you kill the one you recruited us to save. I got one glance at what he was referring to before he grabbed hold of the back of my jacket. One glimpse before I was heaved into the air and sent flying through the distance between me and the dapple gray stallion. A child rode on its back. She was dressed in rags and carried a stout stick that had been carved to a point at one end as a makeshift spear. Her hair was matted and wild, and it was the same muddy brown as my own. Old blood stained her hands like she was wearing crimson gloves. Then I landed almost on top of her. I hit the horse sideways, my stomach over top of its back. Its body was so broad that I wasn't in immediate danger of falling off, especially as the shuriken dragged it out of its gallop. I flailed wildly, seizing hold of the girl's ankle. She was twisting around in turn, raising her makeshift weapon. Not that it did much good. She was still just a child, and I was a full-grown adult. I gave her a good yank and threw her right off the horse's back. Beneath me, the dapple gray stallion screamed in rage. I could feel the vibration of its cry in my chest. I sidled around, sliding myself further up its body until I could reach the mane. I tangled my fingers into the coarse hair and pulled myself upright. The horse attempted to buck or roll, but each time it moved in any one direction, the shuriken's horses would dig in and pull it back into place. The bridle was slender enough that I could roll it up and tuck it in my pocket. I pulled it free and let it fall into shape. The horse tossed its head, as if sensing what I held. My brother gave his flesh for this, I snarled. Fitting, isn't it, that you be ensnared by the very person you thought to enslave? And I dropped it over the stallion's head. Instantly, the horse's struggles ceased. It lowered its head, growing docile in a heartbeat. I reached around its neck and took up the reins. All around me, the shuriken loosened their tethers, and then one brought his horse up alongside the stallion to pull the arrows free. The stallion didn't even twitch. It stood as still as a statue with a bridle of flesh over its head. Remember to fulfill what you promised, the lead shuriken yelled at me as the company formed up around him. There shall not be a sorrowful Christmas this year. I waved at them, and they galloped off, quickly vanishing into the distance. I had the horse, now to retrieve my niece, and at that thought, she tackled me off the horse. Look, she had the element of surprise. I caught one glimpse at her face as she straddled my prone form, her sharpened stick raised high and aimed at my throat. Her lips were peeled back, her eyes were wide in frenzied desperation. Her cheeks were gaunt, and she barely looked human in that moment. And before she could bring the weapon down on me, I swung a fist and hit her right on the jaw. Yes, that's right. I punched a 5-year-old. She was knocked sideways. She rolled and came up on all fours, poised, debating internally on whether to fight or flee. Then the dapple gray stallion spoke. Its words came with an effort, as if it forced each one past the bridle. Its voice pained and grating. Feast on her flesh, my child, it said. This is what you were born to do. The girl's indecision vanished. Her feral rage evaporated, replaced with a calm focus. And when she ran at me, the wild energy was gone from her movements, replaced with a fluid, deadly precision. She snatched up a rock from the field in her hand and threw herself at me. I couldn't use my knife. I couldn't use any weapon, really, not if I wanted to avoid killing her. I caught her at around chest level instead, blocking her body with my arm. She brought the rock down on my head. I jerked out of the way, and it hit my shoulder instead. Her feet planted against my gut. She grabbed hold of my arm, and then she bit me. On the forehead, near the hairline. And let me tell you, head wounds bleed a lot. I shrieked in pain and threw her off of me, and I felt the wound tear as her teeth ripped out a sizable chunk of flesh. Blood poured down the side of my face, and I instinctively squeezed one eye shut tight as the salt burned into it. Stumbling with pain, disoriented by the shift in perspective, I failed to prepare for her next attack. She hit me from behind, leaping onto my back and wrapping her skinny arms around my neck. I felt her teeth bite down on the thick cord of muscle connecting the neck to the shoulders, and I screamed in pain as she tore more flesh free. I heard her swallow. She was going to eat me alive if I didn't do something, so I let myself fall backwards. I didn't expect her to simply let me fall on her. She was agile. and as I expected, she hoisted herself up and over my head and shoulders, intending to land on my chest once my back hit the ground. I grabbed her as we fell, seized her arms and locked them against her body, and then rolled, putting her on the ground and me over top of her. I'm still a grown adult, and she is still just a child. She shrieked and struggled, but with the full weight of my body, I was able to hold her still. My blood splattered on the ground next to her as I grimly held on, realizing that she wasn't about to tire, and I didn't really have a good way to tie her up. So I sat on her, and while she flailed and bit at me, I called Brian on my cell phone. He showed up with the dogs and some rope and helped me tie up my niece. For good measure, I also gagged her with a handkerchief, so she couldn't bite me anymore. I am now on a heavy dose of antibiotics and had to get my tetanus shot updated because of her. Brian took her to my house in his car so we could figure out what to do. I rode the dapple gray stallion back to the campground. I made it walk slowly, clasping some wadded-up gauze from a first aid kit Brian keeps in his car to my forehead, trying to pretend that the blood loss really wasn't that big of a deal. The horse eater was waiting at the edge of the woods when I reached the campground. I directed the stallion over to it and painfully slid off its back. The horse eater extended one pale hand, and I passed the reins to it, careful to avoid touching its thin fingers for no other reason than I wanted as little contact with it as possible. The dapple gray stallion remained subdued the entire time, as if it were nothing but an ordinary horse. "This is a fine bridle," the horse eater said, inspecting it carefully. "Good craftsmanship. A price was paid for it. Is our bargain concluded?" I snapped. I wasn't in the mood to discuss the harvester's handiwork. "Indeed it is. My thanks, campground manager. Should I come across you again, I will tear you in two and feed your entrails to my horse." Then it swung itself up onto the stallion. I saw for a brief moment what was underneath its cloak. A humanoid body, the limbs twisted oddly, bound in scraps of leather and metal. Then the cloak settled around it again, as dark as night, and encasing it in its shadowy form, so that the only thing I could see of its features was the glowing red eye. "You should have known you could not elude me forever," the horse-eater hissed, patting the horse's neck. "But if you serve me well, I shall forgive your disobedience, and give you such a feast of flesh to sup upon." Then it kicked at the horse's side and vanished back into the woods. I really hope that feast of flesh isn't going to be my campers when we reopen in the spring. When I returned to the house, I found that Brian wasn't there. There was a text on my phone saying that he'd taken my niece to someone that might be able to help, and I should just go on to the urgent care and get the bite wounds looked at. He'd fill me in on the details of any arrangement when I got back. And he did. He was waiting at the house when I returned. His dogs loitered on my furniture. I'm not sure how my sofa managed to fit 3 of them at once, but somehow they made it work. "Where's my niece?" I asked, somewhat in a panic. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. My niece had aged. She tried to kill me and would likely try again as soon as we released her. What on earth was I going to tell my brother? "Oh yes, here's your daughter. She's 5 now, and her hobbies include horseback riding and murder." But Brian apparently had the same concerns and had made some decisions in my absence. He'd taken her to the ferry, the one with the deer. They would take charge of the girl. They would send her to live with their kind in the hills, until enough time had passed that she could be returned to her family once her age matched the timeline. "You gave her to the fairies?" I said, somewhat shrill from panic. "Think about it, Kate," Brian snapped. "She is 5, maybe 6 years older than she should be. How are we going to make that work? We get away with faking the cause of death because the police department is on our side, and that's done before the death certificate is issued. We don't have a way to alter a birth certificate that's already been filed. Maybe it's possible, or maybe we could just forge the child an identity, but the town doesn't have the sort of people that know how to do that. I sure don't know how to go about it. Furthermore, we were dealing with a cannibalistic feral child. How do we rehab someone like that? Sure, we've got a therapist in town, but she's not nearly qualified for something like this. Outside help would certainly attract attention." He had some very good points. "I don't know how I'm going to break the news to my brother," I sighed. I wanted to collapse on the sofa, but it was full of dog. Brian hesitated, and when he spoke, he chose his words carefully. I wouldn't have to, he said. The fairy had secured the help of a changeling. I could take them to Tyler and his wife instead, and when their real daughter was ready to leave the hills, the fairies would erase all memory of what had passed, and it would be like nothing had ever happened. It was a horrible solution that he offered me. Isn't the illusion of happiness enough? Why else was the idea of the child's first Christmas so special, when it would mean nothing to the baby? It was all for the parents, so they could experience that joy. Maybe I'm just a cold and cynical person, and all the parents out there are going to yell at me in the comments, but I'm prepared for that. There's been enough messed up stuff in our lives that I wanted my brother to not experience this sort of heartbreak, even if his happiness was based entirely on a lie. I told Brian I'd take them to Changeling. Finally, I asked the question I was dreading: how he'd managed to secure all this assistance. I think I was hoping that the fairy was just being kind on account of the relationship the two have. I made a deal with them, he said wearily. One that I'm responsible for fulfilling. Why did you do that? I asked, my voice high with panic. That's not your job. He whirled on me with uncharacteristic anger. Maybe I just wanted to save someone from having a messed up childhood like we did. Before I could reply, he put his back to me and stalked away. He paused at one point, and I hesitated, wanted to call after him, to ask him what he meant by we, but he shook himself and kept going. I stayed silent. I found out what the price for the fairy's help was the next day. Brian showed up to work without the dogs. They were on loan, he said. On loan until the fairy defeats his enemy. I'm a campground manager, and I've found the enemy of the horse eater. I can't think of anything worse, because if the fairy is its enemy, then there's only one identity that I can think of for the horse eater: the invaders of Ireland, the ancient enemy of the fairies. We're dealing with a Fomorian. Third story: Wendigo encounter. This will be a bit of a read. I live down in Central Texas. It started with a friend of mine, Luke, needing a ride back to town from Houston. He's like family, so I went and brought him on back. He stays kind of near the Dripping Springs area. Before he was in Houston, he and I had always heard some strange sounds at night on his property, but we always shrugged it off. He's got livestock, so we often protect them from coyotes and other things. Plus, we normally shoot guns out there and don't really worry about what's lurking out there. The night I brought him back, we pulled into his long driveway to head to the house, and along the driveway, he has this fire pit about 40 feet away from said road. I know these creatures are tall, but hear me out. Down by the pit, from the car, we both noticed two blue-bordered, massive yellow eyes in my headlight beams staring straight at us. I said, "Luke, what the F do you see that?" As I reached for my flashlight and one of my firearms, ended up grabbing my .22 with hollow points, and I jumped out of my car window to run straight to the gleaming eyes. They seemed to blink once and then vanished into the dark. I ran to where I saw it standing and looked all around, the whole FBI flashlight/handgun stance. Scanning. I hear footsteps approaching from behind. Startling at first, but these steps were from Luke coming up behind me, yelling, "Watch out, watch out." I turn around him a few feet away. He'd stopped. He looked confused and looks around, then said it was just behind you, and it was waist high. I think to myself, what's waist high and has night vision? Mountain lions. So that's what I thought for a moment. Still standing in that spot, he says, "We need more gear," so we went to my car. We loaded/geared up, killed the engine, then back into the trees. We approached the tree line, aiming the lights into the trees about waist high. Then I beam my light upwards and see those same eyes dart in a straight line to our left, further into the trees, away from my car and away from his house. Now we're spooked. How is it 9 to 10 feet up in the air or the trees without making a single noise? No wing flap, no twigs, footsteps, just dead silence. It's about 2:30 a.m. now. We have been following and going the direction we saw the eyes trail towards, staying very quiet. Suddenly, y'all, I promise and swear on my life to this day, out of the thicket, about 8 feet in front of me, I see the eyes open within the darkness of the woods. Massive, glowing, and a few inches apart, which made me assume that this creature has size on its side. It stared into me, I stared back. I'm facing this unknown creature at this moment, and I shakily ask, "Luke, are you seeing this?" Not moving my flashlight and not breaking eye contact. I want to know where this thing is, and I want to know if it moves. I don't, dude. What do you see? Luke, are you sure you don't see this? I don't, what is it? I assume the only reason he did not see these eyes is because of my flashlight and my angle with the beam. He was not standing directly in front of the creature, as he was about 6 feet to my right at the moment, so I understand why he couldn't see what I saw due to angle and perspective. After that little back and forth, I see it approach me. It got closer. Hell no. I raised my handgun. I said, "I'm firing," and then fired at this unknown being directly between the eyes. The round I just fired stirred up a lot of shit. We heard a very short but low-pitched growl/grunt, followed by what sounded like something very heavy, easily heavier than myself, knocking into a couple of the trees around it. Above, the birds in that tree dispersed. We heard no footsteps, no retreating, and stayed there a few moments longer. Listening, scanning. We stayed out there waiting to hear or see anything else for about an hour after that, but the night was quiet and calm afterwards. We go inside, call it a weird day, and go to bed. Next morning, we went to where we spotted and fired. Then we found a bunch of triangle-shaped footprints that lead to the fence. We look up. There's a break in the top fencing's wires. Right on the other side of the break, a few limbs/branches had been freshly broken off as they lay on the ground. Some remained dangling and facing the forest floor, like where you would land if you were to jump from the wire break at the top. This is all I have on this story, other than the fact that my friend and I, to this day, still occasionally see those eyes at night, in our dreams and in our windows. Fourth story. I had an encounter with a Wendigo in northern Idaho. This was a few years ago, and I haven't done much research on it until recently. My family and I had gone up to my grandparents' house. They had 10 acres of land and only used about 1 to 1.5 acres for the house and yard. They had a large, dense pine forest area all around their house. Except for the road to it, there was forest for miles around. They had cut down some trees to make four-wheeler paths that we could ride on when we went up there. One day my sister and I were riding out on the paths on some of my grandparents' four-wheelers. For whatever reason, I think it was to get a drink, but I don't entirely remember my sister went inside. I thought nothing of it and kept riding the four-wheeler I was on. Well, about 3 minutes later, I was driving past a really dense patch of the forest. Over the four-wheeler engine, I heard a loud growl. I heard it clearly to my left in the patch of forest. Thinking it was just a coyote, I looked over towards where I heard the growl. I did not see a coyote. You know that feeling when you look into a forest at night and you get scared something will stare back at you? Well, this happened to me in the middle of the day. What I was looking at still haunts me to this day. I was staring into two large, yellow eyes. It appeared that they were sunken into the creature's face. The eyes were probably about 1.75 times the size of a normal human eye, and they were watching me. I could see by looking at the eyes alone that this was a smart creature. I didn't get to see what it was because it was standing in a bush. This bush was very large, like probably about 10 feet tall. About 8 feet up this bush is where I saw these eyes. I couldn't see any other part of this creature, but I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I put the four-wheeler into drive and sped up to about 55 to 60 miles per hour. I ran inside and did not go back out on the path for the rest of the trip. No one else in my family saw anything, but I was terrified of whatever it was. Fast forward 6 years, and it is this year. I was talking with my friend about spooky things we had seen. I told him about this story and began to wonder what I could possibly have seen. I did a lot of research on what large predatory animals live up there. It is northern Idaho, if you don't believe me and want to go check. After doing a little bit of digging, I found that no animals that were 8 feet tall. I didn't believe it because I was skeptical of anything that was paranormal. I checked again and again because I didn't want to believe it was something that no one had ever captured or been able to prove existed. The largest wolf ever found would have only been 6 feet tall when standing on its hind legs. The largest bear might have been large enough, but it could not have fit in that bush. So I began to research any possible creature that it could have been. Eventually, I found one. A Wendigo. It was the only possible creature I could have seen. I don't know why it didn't attack me or why it let me get away. Based off the features I saw, the large, yellow, sunken eyes, it could have only been a Wendigo. What scared me even more is that a couple years later my grandparents moved out of that house for an unknown reason. They say it was to be closer to the family, but the family was fine making a long drive and coming up very often. They moved only a little bit closer. It is still a long drive. Fifth story. I'm at the scariest thing in the woods. This is an old story, which is fitting. I'm old now myself. I've never shared it, so I suppose it's a new story as well. I grew up in the rural South, down in the heat and the hollers, in small towns where there were more churches than people, where old ladies in their Sunday best would cluck and scoff at advancement and its perceived sins, and then go talk the fire out of a burn on a child's arm. No one took the Lord's name in vain, but we held our breath when walking past the dead. We hung mirrors outside to distract the devil. This was a time when a man could do as he pleased, short of murder, and it was considered private family business. Everyone knew the bad things about everyone else and their families for generations back. Small towns are like that. The bad things were talked about, but only in stuffy front rooms or out back on the farms, only ever among people not involved in it. After all, it was private business. I was the youngest in my family. I had 2 older brothers and an older sister. They left home as soon as they could. One brother to the army, the other to the mills and the drink. My sister got married at 16 and made her escape. I think her husband was a nice man. I was left at home with a dead mother and an angry father. I was angry at them for leaving me, but they barely made it out. It would have been impossible with a child. Mama died when I was 3 or so. I heard whispers around town about what happened. Officially, she killed herself in the creek behind our farm, but I don't know anyone who would willingly lay down in shallow water and let the trickle carry them away. People talked about what probably really happened, that she didn't lay down in that water all by herself, but there was nothing to prove, and after all, that was private business. I remember it was brought up to the man who was my father, and later, when he was drinking, I heard him stumbling round and slurring that he was the scariest thing in these damn woods, and they better remember that. I was 5 or so when everyone left me with the man who was my father. Our farm was out of the town limits, and no one wanted to be around a drunk and maybe killer, so it was just me and him. He was as mean sober as he was drunk. I actually preferred him drunk. He was slower and clumsier that way. He would send me out into the night sometimes. I think because he knew I hated the summer dark. The heat never left with the sun. Things creeped out in the black. The woods I played in by day weren't my friends in the shadows. I would try to stay inside. He would get angrier. He would beat me and yell that he was scarier than anything in those damn woods, and I would do well to remember, or so help me God. Get your ass out there, boy, before I get my hands on you. I had run out into the dark one night. He was meaner than usual, and he followed me out. I felt him graze the back of my shirt, but his foot fell through a hole in our rotting porch, and his body fell with it. It was enough time for me to get away. I ran into those dark woods. I hit so many spiderwebs, I was certain I'd be wrapped up in my own cocoon soon, waiting for something big and hungry to find me. But I could hear yelling and cursing behind me, and after all, he was the scariest thing in those woods. So, I kept running. I ran until I couldn't hear him anymore, till the ground grew strange vines and the trees looked different. Everything looks different in the dark, which is one reason I hate it so much. I ran until I couldn't. I was tired and hungry and thirsty. I was covered in dirt and webs and blood from all the scratches the bushes gave. I decided I was done running and flopped down where I stood. I fell asleep. Maybe I just passed out. I woke up in a holler I hadn't seen before. It was green and growing. There was a clear pool in the bottom, blackberry briars and honeysuckles were tangled together and rambled over the ground and up trees. It was the nicest thing I had ever seen. I don't know which of you have been to the South in the summer. The heat there never leaves. Morning, noon, or night, it's always hot, always sticky. But it was cool here, deep in the woods, down in this holler. I drank the water and ate blackberries while I devised a plan. I could stay here. I could live in this little, lush place and drink spring water and eat blackberries for the rest of my life. I didn't need to go back. I was sitting in the grass when she showed up. I don't know that it was actually a she. I still don't know what I meant. She was walking towards the holler, taking long, slow strides. She looked rickety. That's the best way I can describe it. Like if a person knocks a joint wrong, and the limb goes all wobbly and loose and bends in wrong ways. That was how she moved, like her muscles couldn't hold onto the bones just right. I remember watching her weave through the blackberry thickets. I swear they slithered out of her way. Her head had lolled to the side, as if her neck couldn't support it. She hadn't looked my way, but I had a terrible feeling she was watching me. I thought about running, but I didn't think I would make it. I did the only thing I could think of. Good morning. Afternoon, ma'am. After all, every Southern child knows that politeness is key. I stood up as smartly as I could, which wasn't much. I had been playing in the pool, and the dirt on me had turned to mud. I was stained from blackberries, and I'm pretty sure all my clothes were torn. That lolling head rolled my way. Her eyes, they were so large and black. The holler was getting colder, and I suddenly wanted nothing more than to be out in the heat and dust and sun. Her body turned slowly to match the direction of her head, and she started swaying towards me. How are you doing on this fine day? My mouth was drying up. I searched through all the knowledge in my 5-year-old brain for some wisdom to help me. She paused in her walking and sank down to the ground. Sank isn't the right word for it. She collapsed like a puppet cut off its strings, folding her limbs under her. She propped her head up on her hand, and her chin was resting on her palm, but her fingers, they reached up her face to the top of her head. They didn't end in nails. It was like the fingertips themselves were twisted and hard. I stood for a minute and then sat down as well. Have you had breakfast? I didn't know if this was the right thing to say, but all the grown-ups said it to each other in the mornings when they met, after the good mornings. And how are you today? No, she said slowly. I haven't eaten. Her voice was soft, but the soft of rotten wood, the kind that crumbles when you touch it and all the bugs scurry away. Would you like some blackberries? I asked. Grown-ups offered to feed each other when they said they hadn't eaten breakfast. She made a sound like twigs scratching a window, and I realized it was a laugh. Aren't you polite? She said. I found a little rabbit this morning, but I don't know if there's enough meat for all the work. She was watching me closely, and I remember feeling that something was very wrong. I nodded and made the sound that grown-ups make when they don't know what else to say. How did a little thing like you make it into my hollow? She asked. What's a hollow? I was confused. I didn't know that word. This place is a hollow. I live in hollow places, she said, gesturing around us. But how did you get into the hollow? I thought it was a holler. I was very certain I was right. Everyone called it a holler. She shrugged. Same thing. Now, why are you in the hollow? Another different word? I was very confused now. She understood the face I made and rolled her eyes. Hollers are hallowed hollow places. It's all the same. I didn't think it was, but I wasn't going to argue with her. I was running and I got lost and now I'm here. I told her. I didn't want her to get annoyed that I hadn't answered her question. She perked up a little bit. Oh, she said. What were you running from? I shrugged and started picking at the grass, but I had a feeling that not answering was not an option. My dad, he's the scariest thing in the woods, I said. She snorted and narrowed her eyes. He is not, she said, and dismissed the idea with a jerk of her hand. He is. He says it all the time. I needed him to be the scariest thing. If there was something worse than him, how would I make it? Does he? She asked. She had plucked a leaf and was twirling it in those 2 long fingers. How would you like him to meet the scariest thing in the woods? I thought about it. If he met something scarier, maybe he would be too scared to be mean. I gave her a little nod, and she grinned at me. Her teeth were too many and crowded. She handed me the leaf. "This will make him meet the scariest thing," she said. "Like a spell?" I asked. She shrugged. "What's the spell?" I was staring at the leaf intensely, but it just looked like a leaf. "I just gave it to you." "But spells have to rhyme." I looked at her, shocked. Everyone knew that spells only worked if they rhymed. She made a face at me, though I didn't know the expression. I learned later, it was incredulous. "Are you telling me how to do my magic?" She had narrowed her eyes at me. I shrugged and muttered something about real spells and magic and rhyming. She did the twig scratch laugh and snatched the leaf out of my hand. "You're lucky that you're a novelty," she said. "A rhyming spell. Just for you." She tapped the leaf against her face. When she started talking again, her voice was low. It was trees groaning in a storm. It sucked me in and held me the way a bog sucks in the living and holds onto the dead. The sounds outside were getting muffled. I felt my ears pop. First aloud to start the meet, say it once, "I'm at the street." Second aloud to seal his fate, say it twice, "I'm at the gate." Third aloud, and not once more, say it thrice, "I'm through the door." She slid her gaze over to me, and her eyes were so black and bright. I was starting to get dizzy. I realized I hadn't been breathing. She jerked her head towards the woods. "Off you go," she said in her crumpled wood voice. I was up and running. I ran and ran until the woods were normal and the air was hot. I ran until I burst out of the trees and into the sun. I was back. I felt something jab my leg. I dug into my pocket and pulled out a perfect, unrumpled leaf. I was gasping for air. I don't know if it was the run, maybe it was the heat, maybe it was the leaf I didn't mean to bring back. I looked around. I knew where I was. I was on a little dirt path that ran to our farm. It was actually a dirt road, but everyone called it the street. You go down Main Street and keep following after it turns to dirt, and you just follow the street to Daniel's farm. That's what the grown-ups said when they gave directions. I felt a feeling that I didn't know the word for. Later I learned that it was uneasy, maybe panic. I didn't remember telling the rickety lady about the street. We had a gate at the start of the farm, too. I didn't tell her about that either. It was full panic then. My brain was screaming wrong, wrong, wrong. I heard a rumble, and I thought it was her. I was spinning in circles so I could see her if she tried to creep out of the woods. But it wasn't her. It was the sky. Clouds were rolling in, fat and purple. The sky was the yellow of an old bruise. I don't know if you've ever seen a southern thunderstorm, but they're in a category all their own. Rain doesn't come down in drops, it rolls down in sheets. The wind doesn't blow till the rain comes. The air is so still and hot. I didn't know what to do. I ran back towards the farm. I had come out on the street close to town, and I was screaming the whole way home. The gate was closed when I got to the farm, but I climbed it easily. I shot to the old house and started banging on the door. Streets and meets, fates and gates, the door not once more. My father opened it. His eyes were bloodshot, red against yellow. He was swaying, already drunk. "Shut the hell up, boy," he yelled and cuffed me round the head. "Don't think I forgot about you running off." He grabbed me and pulled me inside the house. It was dark and the house smelled like whiskey and old vomit. He reached to undo his belt, but realized he wasn't wearing one. Swearing, he looked around for something to hit me with. I was crying and trying to tell him about the lady in the woods. He shook me hard. "Shut up! Shut up!" he screamed. "I am the scariest thing out there." Suddenly the words were coming out of my mouth. I tried to hold them in, but they burned, made me cough. I had to get them out. First aloud to start the meet. Said it once, "She's at the street." I was staring at the window. Everything was yellow and sick. Thunder started booming, and I saw something at the edge of the street, something moving slow and rickety. He was squinting at me like he knew something was wrong, but he was too drunk to figure it out. He was swaying on his feet, and he shook his body like he was trying to shake off the feeling of wrong. His face twisted up, and he started coughing. The coughing turned to retching. He was trying to gasp out words between the spasms. "God damn it, boy. What the hell isn't the scariest thing in the woods?" He was down on his knees now. He looked at me, and I looked at the window. He followed my gaze. Second aloud, sealed your fate. Said it twice. She's at the gate. My voice was a whisper, and I was crying, but I didn't fight the words this time. We were staring at the window when the lightning flashed. It hit somewhere near us with a boom that shook the house. We could hear the squeal of the gate as it was forced open. "Boy," he said, "what's going on?" I think that was the fastest I had seen him sober up. I tried to explain, but nothing would come out. I couldn't find any words except for the ones I didn't want to say. Third aloud, and not once more, say it thrice, she's through the door, the words came out. He took them as a warning and tried to bite his own words back. The porch was creaking and groaning. He was on his knees, heaving. I could see trees starting to move out the window. The winds were starting to come in. Another boom of thunder that rattled the house. But the door kept rattling even after everything else stopped. His face was dripping sweat and bright red. He spat on the floor, and it was red too. He was watching the door. It was shaking so hard and so fast. And then I noticed the locks. With every shake and jerk, they were turning. He started coughing, and all that came up was red. He finally caught his breath and inhaled deep. "I'm the scariest thing in the woods," he screamed. The door flew inward, and she was inside. She snatched him up. Her hand was wrapped around his face, and she held him at arm's length as he screamed and clawed at her. Her arm didn't move. There was no looseness in her now. I was cowering on the floor. He jerked in her grasp and howled. She flashed her teeth at me in a smile. "Out the door. Quick now, little rabbit," she cooed. "I might still be hungry afterwards." Somehow, I made it up and out. The rain hit me as I hit the yard. The trees were groaning. The wind was screaming. He was screaming. There was laughing. Hollering. Hollowing. Hollers in a hollow place. Hallowed hollows for hollers. Holler, hollow, hallow. The people from town found me later. They went up to the farm and came back yellow as the sky had been. They didn't tell me what they found. No one would even whisper about it around me. A family in town took me in. I moved north when I got older. I stay out of the woods. I stay in large crowds, away from the hollow places. I avoid churches and graveyards. Hollers, hollows, hallows. They're all the same, and she might still be hungry. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.